Okay, now we're going to look at open market operations when there is a change in the demand for exchange settlement funds. Right? Again, keep it simple, where there is a change in the demand for money. Okay, so what happens and what type of open market operations does the Reserve Bank apply when there's been a change in the demand function? Okay, so I will just make that smaller, put that to one side. Right, so essentially we were asking the question, what happens? Right, so here is your exchange settlement funds. Here's your cash rate. Here's our vertical supply curve, S0. Here's your demand curve, D0, and your initial equilibrium, I0, ES0. Okay, so the demand curve can shift, right? It can shift upwards, it can shift downwards, right? If there is an increase in economic activity, what happens? Right? If there's an increase in economic activity, right? Increase in economic activity, what we tend to find is you will end up seeing an increase in the demand for exchange settlement funds. Right? You are using money more often. Right? You're using money more often. Okay? And the opposite will apply if there is a decrease in economic activity. There will be a decrease in the demand for ES funds because there are less transactions going on. So in the first situation where there's an increase in economic activity, right, you will get a shift out in your demand curve. So you end up at D1. Okay, this will end up increasing the cash rate. Okay, the cash rate will go up because there is no change in the supply of money, right? People want more exchange settlement funds, okay? But because there's no increase in the supply of exchange settlement funds, the price of the exchange settlement funds, which is the interest rate, has to go up. Okay. But if there is a decrease, then it moves in the opposite direction. Okay. And you will end up with a lower interest rate. Okay. But in each case, no change in the exchange settlements because there's been no change in the supply of exchange settlements. Okay. So this is what is happening to the cash rate. This is what happens to the cash rate when there is a change in demand for exchange settlement funds and no change in supply. Okay. The question then is, how does the Reserve Bank react to this? What if the Reserve Bank does not want the interest rate to change? What if the Reserve Bank of Australia wants the interest rate to remain at I0? Okay, so we're going to look at that now. So let's go back to the first situation where there is an increase in economic activity. Okay, you've got your exchange settlement funds, you've got your cash rate, you've got your supply, you've got your original demand curve, interest rate I0, exchange settlement funds ES0. Then for whatever reason, the increase in economic activity, there has been a shift out in the demand curve and we end up at the higher cash rate of I1, but no change in the balance of exchange settlement funds. Okay? But what we say now is we are going to assume that the RBA wants the change in the cash rate to be zero. Basically, they want to keep the cash rate at I0. They do not want the cash rate to have gone up to I1. So it now has to react. It has to react to the change in the situation. The change in the situation is the demand for exchange settlements have increased. Okay, so it has to do something about the supply of money or exchange settlements, the increase in the supply of exchange settlements, in order to bring the interest rate back down from I0 to from I1 to I0. Okay, so what it has to do is it would have to increase the supply of money, right? It would have to increase the supply of money such that we go to our new equilibrium, right? We have our new supply and our new demand, and they intersect over here, which just so happens to be back at I0 and at a higher rate of exchange settlement funds, ES1, right? So the Reserve Bank of Australia, in order to maintain the interest rate or cash rate at I0 in the face of an increase in economic activity, will have to increase the supply of exchange settlements. This implies that it has to run expansionary monetary policy. Right? So what has happened over there? Well, the RBA has essentially done an open market operation, right? An open market operation to buy government securities from the commercial banks. Okay, the commercial banks receive exchange settlement funds from the RBA, right? Essentially, they're receiving money. Okay, so now you have a increase in the supply of money or exchange settlements in the economy, right? Which will lower the interest rate. So that is essentially what has happened over here. Okay, in order to keep the interest rate constant at I0 in the face of an increase in the interest rate due to an increase in the demand for exchange settlement funds, the Reserve Bank of Australia will have to increase the supply of money into the economy. Let me undo that. I can't seem to undo that, but okay, that's what has happened. Okay, so what about then the opposite situation, right? What about the situation where there has been a fall in economic activity and the interest rate or the cash rate has fallen? Okay, now we will see that the Reserve Bank of Australia has to run contractionary monetary policy. Previously, it ran expansionary monetary policy. So let's look at that situation. You've got your ES funds, you've got your cash rate, supply, demand, your original equilibrium. Okay, now there's been a shift down in the demand curve, D1, okay, which will result in a fall in the interest rate and no change in the exchange settlement funds. Okay, and because the Reserve Bank of Australia, we argue, wants the change in the interest rate to be zero, i.e. they want to keep the interest rate or the cash rate at I0, it will have to decrease supply. Okay, the supply curve will essentially have to decrease to S1, which would take us to a reduction in the exchange settlement funds available in the economy and no change from the original cash rate. Okay, so what is going on is there's open market operations going on, right, where the Reserve Bank of Australia is selling government securities to the commercial banks. Okay, the RBA sells government securities to the commercial banks. Okay, so the commercial banks give exchange settlement funds, or essentially they give money to the RBA. This reduces the amount of exchange settlement funds available in the economy for people to borrow, which will result in an increase in the interest rate from I1 to I0, right? So this is how the government, this is how the Reserve Bank of Australia can react to a change in economic activity if it wants to maintain the cash rate at its original